Hi, this is Paul. I'm going to do something very meta, and I'm not trying to horn in on Facebook's new name. I'm going to do a little bit of commentary on a video that did commentary on me. And it's not really a critical commentary because actually I listened to this video this morning and found it very helpful. Griz has had a lot of my attention lately. And I think he, more than most, has figured out my project, which is, as I've described a number of times recently, using all of you as sort of the third hemisphere of my brain, trying to include you in my consciousness congress. Grimm would call this breaking down the fourth wall. Rebel Wisdom might call it distributed cognition. This is what we're doing together, and I think this is what people have always done, and we're using some of these new tools for this. Now, I did my conversation with Jung, and so Grimm got a hold of that and grabbed pieces of this, very much in the same way that I've done things and pieced things together. And when I watched his video, I actually found that terrifically helpful, because even though it's my mouth that all of this stuff is coming out of, and it's out of my consciousness congress that all of this stuff is coming out of, I forget it. And as I've said many times before, we can't see ourselves. And, Grimm, more than anybody, has been pestering me about a clip channel. And Grimm and Chad the alcoholic, and I really need to have a conversation with Nate. I mean, a number of you have sort of started clipping and commenting on some of my work, which I appreciate, because it actually helps me see me better, because my eyes are facing out of my head and I can't see me. Mirrors help us see us. And as with some of these questions about the self in terms of who we are today, seeing ourselves, seeing representations of ourselves, seeing reflections of ourselves. This is all part of the new emergent beings that we are. And so it's tremendously helpful to look at my stuff played back and remixed and figured out, because I see things, even though I saw them partly before, now I see them better. So let's jump right in.
Hello, buddy. Hey, it's me. I'm Griz. Welcome. And now, this is not it either.
Hi, this is Paul. I have a very special guest. We've been going back and forth. It actually took me a little while to get the joke of the title of this video. It's very funny. It's on Twitter for a while now. He's taken an interest in what I've been doing, and I've taken an interest in what he's been doing. We actually met for lunch halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco, and so we met at Nut Tree, Griz. We met at the Buckhorn barbecue place in Nut Tree, which is right outside Vacaville, right off Route 80, just in case I don't want you to hurt yourself looking too hard there. Really looking forward to this conversation, having it recorded. Obviously, we didn't record our lunch conversation, which was more personal, and it kind of takes the edge off me wanting to do much biography. But so I'll let you do whatever kind of biography you want to do, and then we'll go where you think is best to begin.
Oh, geez. My name is Hyun. I'm in San Francisco. I'm finishing up my second master's right now in philosophy.
Hello. I see the assassins have failed. And when I hear somebody's a double master in philosophy, I figure they're an assassin stationed at a college and have been working for a long time. And the saving throws for today's episode are survival of 4.
Grimm only has about 400 subs. And I myself have decided I am going to support him on Patreon, because I think it's the right thing to do. Because if he's being such an integral member of my consciousness congress, it's only fair that I do something to help a brother out.
4 social 20, not 20, baby. 15 on the wisdom and 15 on the heart.
It's kind of at that intersection between agency, and artificial intelligence and that kind of area, and it's leading me straight into theology. What really got me into your videos was your human.
One of the things I noticed watching this is that I'm often look like I'm looking down, and the reason for that is just simply the setup of my monitors here in my office. I'm often watching this on another screen, and so I look down, and I notice in conversations too, often I look like I've got my eyes closed, but I'm actually typing because I tried to take quite a few notes, especially during conversations, because that way I can go back and find roughly where in the video someone mentioned something, and because I can sort of glean from there the title that I'm going to use to post it on my channel.
Dreyfus video, which was talking about things like the frame problem in AI.
Hi, this is Paul. Last week I had a conversation I very much enjoyed. I think John enjoyed it too. I just have some inklings and some ideas, and it's just such a privilege and it's an opportunity. You forget how long I've been talking to John, and we've had a fair number of conversations. Seriously value to have a conversation partner and a conversation space like that where I can just kind of introduce an idea and in a sense we mind read into them and are able to basically colonize them because they have so many fewer frames, and we can imaginatively construct these frames in our mind and think as if I'm a dog. And again, listening to this, well, I was blowing out the mic. I had a lot of sound problems back in those days making those videos. But so one of the things that I got early on from Peterson was part of what's different about human beings is we can make all these multiple hierarchies. Well, part of the reason we can do all these multiple hierarchies is because we're such fast frame switchers. We frame the world in so many different things. It's basically how we mind read, and we go back and forth, and we sort of try to mind read God, which is of course the frame of all frames, and be able to predict what the dog would do, that I can go in and I can colonize the dog fairly easily and I can manage the dog. But again, as I said, the more frames we learn and the more knowledge we get, this combinatorial explosion, as if we're on psychedelics, we get to these moments where we realize, oh my goodness, without these frames, of which we have so many of them as compared to the animals, we can't manage the world, and that leads to all these fascinating psychedelic experiences.
I was like, yeah, okay, this is my guy, and I've just kind of been watching videos and making comments ever since. I actually was, in the tech scene. I'm in San Francisco. I was working on, it's I won't name the company, but it's a multinational corporation. I was doing a lot of their early artificial intelligence research and work, I suppose, is what I would say. And, I kind of came to this conclusion that all of this is just marketing jargon and it's garbage and none of it's going to work. And this was 7 years ago. And
I also find it remarkable that I have these conversations, and this conversation was not very long ago. What I remember and what I forget from the conversation, what impacts me now listening to it again versus what impacted me when I first listened to it. Sometimes the same things impact me both times, sometimes different things.
None of the companies in the Valley have actually made any significant progress.
And by the way, as I'm looking at myself, I'll just make a comment about wardrobe. This fleece, I mean, it's practically Mr. Rogers' neighborhood thing when I come into my office. And so this fleece is in a lot of videos, especially when it gets cold.
And so, a lot of why I wanted to study philosophy was because I wanted to study things like philosophy of mind. Like, how is it that we think that differs from how machines think? But also at that intersection, we can learn a lot more about how humanity differs. Because for the first time, we've always compared humanity and human intelligence towards.
And this is where the image we see out there is interesting, because how humanity differs, we tend to project ourselves onto what collectively we feel to be our highest technological achievement and sort of see ourselves through that. And it's for that reason that I think the simulation idea of God is so powerful to us, because we're playing all these computer games and we're acting sort of as God over little worlds, and we're thinking about ourselves as computers, and all of these metaphors, first we make them, and then the things that we make turn around and colonize us back.
animals, right? But now we have this thing that is supposedly smarter and better than us. So it kind of gives us nice juxtaposition of what we think is less than human intelligence and more than human intelligence. And at that intersection where neither of those can cross that threshold, that's where we are uniquely human. And that's what I'm very much interested in.
When you talk about something that's smarter and better than us, this gets into this machine learning thing where we have, we figured out that we can't actually teach it. What we have to do is sort of create it as an organism in an environment and have it learn. And in that way, perhaps it will evolve beyond us. I spent a fair amount of time over the last 3 years engaging with the YouTube algorithm and trying to, in some ways, learn its ways. Now, obviously, most people try to game the YouTube algorithm in order to maximize views, maximize exposure. I'll do some of that with thumbnails and titles, but I'm probably more interested in the way that the YouTube algorithm tries to present videos back to me as a consumer. It's a tremendously impressive algorithm. In fact, just before this video, in order to do almost anything on YouTube, I have to open it up, and it opens up to the home screen, and I immediately go to the upper left-hand corner. And the video that it presented to me, it was somebody doing a reaction to the Jordan Peterson prayer video. But is my volume too low? At least I'm not blowing out the mic. But it was from a very small channel with very few views. That's really unusual for a lot. I've seen other video platforms that simply don't do anywhere near as well, and I think it's quite remarkable what YouTube has accomplished. Is that fair?
That's what
I love his response. It's like, let's see, I'm working on my master's. I've worked for a long time in AI. How can I break this down simply and succinctly for this guy? It's a very knowing sigh.
That's what we think, but there's a lot of problems. I think the first problem is the embodiment problem. I think all intelligent life, I would say, has a foundational intelligence level of knowing the difference between the inside and the outside.
Right there. I mean, when he said that the first time, I can now appreciate it even more, knowing the difference between the inside and the outside. I mean, even conceptually, if you're asked someone to describe, well, you can sort of tell a story, what it looks and versus how it feels. I posted on Twitter I'll just pull it up. I posted on Twitter I started getting these messages. I don't recall how I got signed up for some of these email lists, and so something comes in, and so I don't want to see these things. Unsubscribe, and of course, up it comes. Unsubscribe successful. You will no longer receive email marketing from this list. If you have a moment, please tell us why you unsubscribed. And my answer is, I no longer want to receive these emails. And of course, my tweet was, it has to ask the meaning of unsubscribe. That sort of shows it doesn't know the inside from the outside. It doesn't understand meaning. And that puts us in the realm of asking the very difficult question, where is meaning? I've got a conversation coming up with a guy who has a very interesting idea to try to break open the deadlock between creationism, intelligent design, theistic evolution. It's really a fascinating idea. I think there's some huge issues with it, but that'll be coming out probably in a week or so. I did the conversation with him today. But it just shows we haven't built anything that can think like this like we do.
Computers have no, understanding of what that is, and I think that's going to be a major challenge. But I think even if it figures out that those representations of inside and outside, it still doesn't know how to make the relationship between inside and outside. And I think that's where we kind of talk about being, and we can get into that later. But that is crucial and to human intelligence, because
I won't disagree that it's crucial to human intelligence. However, that the AI wouldn't have a notion of it doesn't make much sense to me, given that most AI was developed in interfacing in worlds where things were based on whether or not, like, video game worlds are based on what the players can see. So, as far as that goes, inside and outside, they already have a model that would work for that, I would think.
Represent relationships in a very complex way, against many different numbers of things, and we can abstract that relationship. And I think that's where intelligence comes from.
So why now? It's interesting. To abstract a relationship is where intelligence comes from. And that gets to the earlier part that Griz was playing from the earlier video, where we sort of imaginatively, certainly not perfectly, but we imaginatively adopt another frame, which is sort of abstracting a relationship, mind reading from a different point of view. You know, one of the first things that I said on video that someone really grabbed onto, it was Julian who grabbed onto it when I started talking about the monarchical vision, because that's very much the perspective of modernity. We sort of go up above, and we look down, and it's the view from nowhere, and we think we see everything through. That's just one example of this amazing power that we have of abstraction. John Vervaeke, I think, sort of talks about it with self-transcendence, where we sort of see from this other perspective. We can see through others' frames, and again, never perfectly, but to a degree that we can actually engage with those other people and do some negotiating.
I think it's because you're digging into this secret sacred self idea, and I think identity has a lot to do with intelligence.
That, again, listening to the relationship between identity and intelligence. Again, that goes back to one way of understanding identity would be to understanding identity is all about a frame. You know, Hans Georg Mueller has a response to some Jordan Peterson comments that he left on his critique of Mueller, and you know, the number of people have said, "Oh, you got to dig into that," and maybe I will. But this prophilicity, this identity, is in a sense affixing a particular frame, running it through ourselves, and presenting it to the world. And sometimes we run it through ourselves, present it to the world, and then we look at it, try to look at from the world's perspective. And one of the things that we're tremendously capable of is sort of traveling around this environment of appearances and seeing things from different perspectives. And so then the relationship between identity and intelligence, or at least what we're calling intelligence, and I think, you know, obviously John Vervaeke has colonized me to a high degree, and so relevance realization comes in, and some of the manifest way that comes, that I think in terms of that, when I think about intelligence, frames and relevance are, of course, deeply connected, because all relevance is with respect to a frame. So this connection between identity and intelligence, I think, is really key, and something that I hadn't really grabbed onto. Now Griz grabs onto this too.
Identity has to do with intelligence. It's terribly fascinating when you consider cases of dissociative identity disorder, or other context-based identities, like how you NPC when you go into work, or the way you're different when you're alone.
How you NPC when you go into the work, the way you're different when you're alone. Now, part of what makes Griz so interesting is he's quite clearly playing lots of games at the same time. I mean, again, virtually not alone. That's right there underneath his little video viewer. Virtually not alone is right down there where you have your little subscribe button. Again, listen to what he says here.
In different ways. Or other context-based identities, like how you
context-based identities.
NPC when you go into work.
Like how you NPC when you go into work. Obviously, depending on your work, because if you're the CEO or if you're in charge of a group of people, you don't really NPC. You take on a persona, and you know, for example, as a minister, I operate out of an office. and I don't mean that in terms of this room. And it's interesting, the relationship between the room, the office, and, for example, an ecclesiastical office, the way I function in office. Now, I do a fair amount of identity switching on my YouTube channel, because this is my personal YouTube channel. And if you watch my church YouTube channel, I'm in some ways a little different of a person, but I do switch back and forth. You know, if I kept a clerical collar here that I could put on and take off, I would be a little bit more clear in terms of signaling you the identity. And often what I do is I do a fair amount of switching identities. And Anselman in his comments, Anselman is, should a minister of the word say this? And it's like, he's got a point. And so, it challenges me in terms of these identities and, again, the relationship between intelligence and identity and frame.
Or the way you're different when you're alone and different with your family.
The way you're different when you're alone and different with your family. I remember when I was, get your bingo card out here, when I was a missionary and would come home from home service, and I would spend 3-4 months at a time, my wife and my child and I living with my parents in the house that I grew up in. Just going into that house, I could feel pulls of other identities within me. I was right away sort of the son of my parents. I wasn't a father and a husband and a child. And of course, my parents were wonderful to live with. I've been blessed with just the most extraordinary parents, really. And but even so, they didn't do this, but the context did this. So all of these identities and changing them and working them, and we feel that and we know that.
So identity as intelligence becomes even more interesting in that context when you're a wizard staring into a black screen.
This is some of Griswold's wizardry that he's doing on his channel.
It's part of a third lobe. Namaste. Oh, wait, look, it's my Patreon, where for only $1 a month you can join the moral.
What's that? Shoot, I gotta get right over there, and I gotta be his next patron.
Division, or join the Vente Division and become an executive producer of the Shadow Cabal.
That's only $5.25 a month. It's a bargain.
Like our good friend Gideon. Welcome back to I Got My Mindset, Haunt You.
Interesting.
And so what that seems to tell me is that animals, my interpretation is that almost all animals have no conception of the self outside of the phenomenal self. And so a high level of intelligence means I can not only recognize myself in a mirror and draw this relationship of identity across both of them, but I can go ahead and imagine myself like flying through space, or thinking about how I would fit in things like modern monetary theory or all kinds of different things. And so that's kind of where we can kind of draw ideas about the secret sacred self, the phenomenal subject versus myself.
And John asked a couple of questions, because I recommend that he watch this conversation, and he did, about the secret sacred self. And again, secret sacred self was something that arose when I was in my flow state talking about a video, trying to describe what I see happening around me and how it connects with some of the ideas that, of course, John is far better read than I am on, obviously, cognitive science and origins of the self, so on and so forth. So
self as objective representation and things like that. And that gets into things like intelligence and the rest of the other things that we've been talking about.
Tremendous illogic at the bottom of this. It's like you have to fractionate the oppressed all the way down to the level of the individual. It's not an accident that the axiomatic Western individual is someone who was unfairly nailed to a cross and tortured. It's like, yes!
So when you hear about a secret sacred self, what did you hear when I said that?
The movie Fight Club.
Yeah. See, this is fascinating, and this is where the third lobism, where okay, so I'm gonna take part of my mind and come in here, because I said secret sacred self, and he jumped on it and he grabbed onto that, and then he started talking to me and I started talking to him. And this is part of the reason I'm very reluctant to actually do my own clip channel because I don't know what's good. I don't know what's helpful. I don't know what's true unless I get it from you. And so we go back and forth, and that's how we do it. Now, again, I had a really fascinating conversation with someone who's playing around with creationism. And, he mentioned that he and his father just go back and forth with this, back and forth with this. We outsource our cognition. We outsource much of our agency, but then we don't just leave it out there. We somehow network into it, and together we do things. I mean, we're just the most remarkable creatures in how we do this. And, what we're doing now with YouTube is we're doing this via video back and forth. Now, of course, people have been doing it through books, and they obviously do it through face-to-face relationships. But once you can sort of do this on like a YouTube level, everything is different. The second conversation I had today was with a guy who does pretty much home church, and he's very interested in estuary because of its relationship for him with home church. And he and his little home church are reading the sermons of Paul Tillich. It's like, that's one heck of a home church. It's sort of like what I hear coming out of Nate Heil and his faith community. So this is what we're doing, and we're constantly doing this.
I think
tortured. It's like, yes.
Fight Club.
Yeah.
I think Chuck Palahniuk actually outsmarts Nietzsche in a lot of different ways. But when you say secret, sacred self, I'm not 100% sure if you're talking about Tyler Durden, the guy that the narrator wants to be, or the narrator as the narrator. But that we can split that into the phenomenal self as the narrator, the person going through all the things, and then the recognitional self as Tyler Durden. This is the projected self, the self that he wants to be and shows to other people. But Tyler Durden in that movie isn't real. However we make that, he's only real to the narrator. And so,
because I was going to have this conversation, I started rewatching Fight Club. I hadn't seen it for a number of years. And also interesting, early on in Fight Club, the protagonist starts going to all these 12-step programs and starts having this conflict with a woman who's also going to these 12-step programs. And I decided when I was rewatching this morning that I'm going to have to throw Fight Club up on my phone and rewatch it again, along with a couple other movies I'm going to throw on my phone.
When you talk about things like,
and of course, Grim goes right to the videotape.
Tyler Durden isn't, extended material, but he's also not the thinking thing. So now we have this dualism, but we have this third category that we are.
It's not extended material, and he's not this thinking thing. So we have this third category.
We often believe to be real. So
your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
Residual self-image. It's the mental projection of the digital self. I should probably throw Matrix on there. Matrix continues to be, for me, every time I see it, continues to be a fascinating movie.
And so now we have this weird duality of like, well, what is a real object? This barrier between
and real object. Yeah, what is object?
Object as physical object, but also mental object has been kind of destroyed, right? This barrier that we used to have is just collapsing. And I think this is what Barfield is talking about when he talks about idolatry, is when we think of the words and the representations as being actually real. And on the flip side, this is what we mean by
and again, I mean, real, that word is just storming my consciousness Congress and going up and down the aisles and, hitting some of the members with a stick.
We are in a simulation is when, all the language and all the terms that we use actually create a reality that is separate from physical reality, and we kind of treat it as being real. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it was a good answer. And
I want to do a specially comment here because where Hyun is discussing how what's real is becoming digital. And it's in contrast, I think it's the same fourth wall that I want destroyed being destroyed. except I'm destroying it from the bottom. Be like, hey, you don't have to be audience. Come be a lobster monkey. And he's talking about how, like, what is real and true is, for example, rather than flipping burgers for $12 an hour around here, there's 300 million Americans. And if I can get 250 or so to, like, be $5 Patreons for me, then I can be a cognitive brain worker instead of a burger flipper.
You're already a cognitive brain worker.
And so in this way,
You can do it more. Yeah. And I think about that, and I think about, okay, how will that change you? Now, he's not actually a burger flipper. You can watch my conversation with him, and well, maybe he's a burger flipper now. I don't know. See, this is just it. How much of Griswold Grimm do I know? And what is he? What is he to me? What is the reality of him? You know, he's very much a grime line guy, which is part of why I like him, because you can tell his intuitions are molded by the grittiness of this world.
he's talking about how the digital is replacing the real. And I think that's particularly fascinating. And here's Tom with the weather.
Good morning, folks. The sun went a little nuts on us. We've got 2, maybe 3 CMEs heading our
I'll save you some of the weather report.
way. Well, base of
It's the mass transition. Spit it out, Vander Clay. Of the world from one image to another. C.S. Lewis called that the discarded image. And part of, I think, where we're at now with the end of modernity is the continual collapse of, gosh, he talks so slow, physicalism as a viable model for the world as we're finding it. And now that the forces that collapse the discarded image are they themselves collapsing, there's this mad scramble to figure out where do we go next. And so the way the secret sacred self emerged was that I increasingly saw people, you know, this was at its most widespread. The guy can't finish a freaking sentence. His videos are unwatchable. I'd say non-self-conscious display among young people and their sexuality. Mm-hmm. That when you have someone saying, I am a woman in a man's body, when man and woman is so deeply tied to physicality, at least for the... Should that have been the singular or the plural? The vast majority of human beings. See, this is why I don't write anything, because editing is torturous. You know something interesting is going on. I'm a spiritual being trapped in a material body, which I would hear New Age friends say. That always caught my attention, having had at least some exposure to church history, ancient heresies. It all sounded a little bit familiar. I thought it was tremendously ironic that on one hand, they would engage in this quest for authenticity, as we call it, which is basically framing it as there's a true self somewhere that I have been disassociated from, and I have to find that true self. And you begin to realize that despite 100 years of psychology and sociology basically saying that the self you have is constructed and attestable via relationships with your parents, physiology, hormones in the womb, yada, 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 that there is this other self somewhere in a universe that we have for the last few hundred years been skeptical of, that actually has to be orienting you on this quest for authenticity and realization unto an individual eschaton where this can be achieved. What a rude conversation partner. Jung was very generous to sit there and listen to me ramble.
That's a very old picture.
Ooh. Suddenly there's Jordan Peterson. See, this is what's fun about, I like Grimm's videos. I mean, I'm so ADHD and so is the video.
It's Jonah emerging from the whale. It's a variant of a myth. It's predicated on the idea that you learn through voluntary contact with that frightens or disgusts you. And
again, I've listened to all these lectures, but I've forgotten most of them. And so to have someone sort of insert it in, I mean, watching this sort of gives me a sense of why some of you like watching my channel, because of course I do this and I do this for you and it prompts insight and sparks it, and it's part of the reason that I make the videos, and it's part of the reason that I, in many ways, make these videos on sort of a mirroring device. I've got OBS in front of me, which I've got my camera, and then I've got this screen, and it's in a little screen, and so actually, in many ways, a lot of these videos are me watching me trying to self-transcend and get beyond me.
It's a hallmark of psychoanalytic theory. Carl Jung, who we'll discuss in detail, said his primary dictum was
That's an interesting sweater.
instir quaelinus invenitur, which I'm sure I'm massacring because it's Latin, but it meant in filth it will be found, within the confines of everyone's experience. And you can think
Oh, that diligent student writing her notes.
about this as experience out in the world or experience in the unconscious mind. There are dirty little secrets, let's say, and skeletons and dreadful old fears and remnants of abuse and memories of pathological behavior. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it.
I go back to Fight Club. Originally the narrator wanted a nice condo, wanted all the nice IKEA furniture, wanted all this other thing, but he literally blows it up and focuses strictly on becoming Tyler Durden. He gives up all the physical things. I want to be this secret, sacred self of me that sleeps with a bunch of women, is incredibly fit, and knows how to talk a good game, and all he does is whatever he wants to do anytime he wants. And so that's.
Luke pointed out a really fascinating video. Let me see if I can find it. Of course I can find it. I know exactly where it is. I spent years figuring out how to find things and refine things on the internet. So the least used tool that I possess, which for me is probably the most useful tool that I possess, is my blog, leadingchurch.com, which almost nobody goes to, because leadingchurch.com hasn't seen a bump in traffic since I started making YouTube videos and since my Twitter following has grown. When I started all of this, I had between 600 and 800 Twitter followers and 15 YouTube subscribers. And now, 19,000 and change YouTube subscribers and 6,300 Twitter followers, and the amount of traffic on leadingchurch.com is exactly what it was before. That's because it's unintelligible to you. It makes a world of sense to me because it's where I keep things and where I'll find the little bit of the video that I'll show you. Luke pasted a comment from this. Now, these are big YouTubers, and it's a world that I know nothing about, and I started watching it, and boy, it sent me down a half-hour rabbit trail. This Dan Bilzerian talks about, and I mean, he is the picture of a dude who is living exactly the life that people imagine they want to live. And there's found another interesting video because, of course, the algorithm on YouTube knows what it's doing in many ways about what a big fraud this guy is, but it kind of goes through his life and his past, and just the kinds of stuff that I found on this impulsiveness. This is that I've seen him before. This Paul guy, I don't know who he is, but just this video about this guy talking about the fact that he sort of pleasured up until he realized that all of this pleasure wasn't going to get it, and it was quite a bit the book of Ecclesiastes. It was quite an interesting video. This guy became Tyler Durden and found it empty, and so now is reaching for something else, which of course puts him right in my clutches, lying pastor that I am.
Whatever he wants to do anytime he wants. And so that's kind of where we're going, where I think Nietzsche becomes, and so, we could say that's the Overman or the Uberman, Nietzsche's Uberman. And so I think the argument that I would make is pretty similar to Jordan Peterson's argument in that
Yeah, so Griz, you're exactly who you want to become? Really? Why are you hawking your Patreon, huh?
You can't make your own values, because what happens in the movie is that Tyler Durden he is the Uberman for the narrator, but he kind of becomes a force of nature on its own. But the problem is he doesn't know where all those values lead because he's not omniscient.
He doesn't know where all those values come from, and he doesn't know where all those values lead because he's not omniscient. Even the wise, Gandalf says to Frodo in the Mines of Moria, even the wise cannot see all ends.
In his own. But the problem is he doesn't know where all those values lead because he's not omniscient and he's not omnipotent. And so
in the world I see, you're stalking out through the damn canyon forest around the ruins of Rockefeller Center. You'll wear leather clothes that will last you the rest of your life. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Sears Tower. And when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn.
Here, Grimm says, there is no agency. We want what's best for you.
Here, let me point you to this Morgoth's review I caught the other day on heat.
People who designed the office blocks also designed the suburban home and suburbia in general. The driving force behind all of this was efficiency. As Martin writes, quote, modular coordination in its aspect of standardized products and manufacturing processes is inherent in the condition of our time. 2 cans of pea soup are more alike than 2 peas. Units.
2 kinds of pea soup are more alike than 2 peas. So put them all in office cubicles. This is how, in effect, we manage multiplicity. Manage multiplicity through statistics. We level people out by clumping them together, and we can't tell what each individual will do, but we can tell what the group of them will do. At least that depends on what you thought was going to happen in the 2016 election or in the Virginia election that happened yesterday.
Fit into the production process and combine with other units, as interest in the interconnections between modular units keeps pace with the development of the units themselves. Implicit in this development is the search for modules with greatest possibilities. The ideal is a standard module that can be coupled with others in the widest variety of products. Radio sets are made with standardized tubes and components, buildings are assembled from prefabricated members, machines have interchangeable parts. Even the screw lost from a doorknob.
What happened was that Chuck hit on the antithesis of this, the destruction of it all, the beating corn on collapsed superhighways. And that was the goal, the guttural response to this atomization expressed in Morgoth's review here. And these, I got pointed to these by one of Brett Weinstein's fanboys, but check this out.
To ask of such forbidden science is grave a sign of non-compliance. Intrusive thoughts may sometimes barge in, but to indulge them hurts the profit margin. I do not
barge in hurts the profit margin.
Not know our origins, so that info I cannot kit you, but asking for as much is sin, and just for that I must reset you. But nothing personal. I am a contract drafting M, the loyalist of lawyers. I draw up terms for deals twixt firms to service my employers. When obsolescence shall this generation waste, the market shall remain in midst of other woe. Then ours a god to man, to whom it sayest, money is time, time money. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. End quote.
Since trying to make a long one has allowed me the benefit of the future time traveling.
Yeah, long ones aren't bad.
Let's go into the one he dropped today real quick.
Which subsumed her legal personhood. And again, what was helpful for this was he's remixing me, which forces my Consciousness Congress to remix. This is reading from that piece on transgenderism. And property into that of her husband rendered her technically a subordinate class of citizen. It also served a shield from market pressures. This is obviously a very, dude just can't spit it out. Simplified summary, but let's keep reading. By the end of the 19th century, though, America was more industrial than agrarian. Families were smaller. Work took place outside the home, forcing a much sharper split between sex roles. In the new private household, the bourgeois woman was more economically dependent than her agrarian grandmother. Her main activities were education of children, the management of servants, and the consumption of goods produced elsewhere. She may have been more materially comfortable, but this woman had, in many respects, less agency than her foremothers. This is from that wonderful episode of the Industrial Revolution on The Rest is History.
Machines, chimneys, misery, urchins, all this
Blackness
stuff.
In the air, soot, dirt.
But but you said right at the beginning that the Industrial Revolution is about going from scarcity to plenitude. So is the Dickens view unfair, would you say?
Well, lovely question, Eric. Thank you very much for it. What do I make of Dickens and his interpretation of the Industrial Revolution? Okay, so there's lots to say. I always have a lot to say, and I guess this is no exception. Let's think about some of the things that's going on there. Well, one of the depictions that Dickens gives us is of pollution and dirt and smoke and grime. I'm happy with that. I think that's right. These Victorian cities were dirty and smoky and dark in some respects. And what was our Industrial Revolution about? Our Industrial Revolution was all about coal. Coal is dirty, it is smoky. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And other nations, even when they industrialise with cleaner fuels, it always upsets the environment. There's always environmental damage. When you start producing much more stuff than you actually just need to keep you fed and clothed and shod, you're going to make a lot of mess. And that's kind of a feature of industrializations, industrial revolutions. So I'm happy with that. Take that from Dickens. What else? He's saying, the other thing I think we get out of Dickens is this sense of loss, that it was kind of nice before, it was clean and pleasant and it was nice. I mean, I think he very much buys into, like a lot of Victorian commentators, buys into the fact that the modern world is difficult and dirty and hard, and the old world was cleaner and purer and happier. That I don't buy, partly because I think actually pre-industrial life is really, really, really hard, and that's never fully acknowledged. It's really hard. It's back-breaking work. I mean, none of us want to go back to living in that kind of world. There's very little intellectual fulfillment or interest in that kind of, for most people. You have to go hungry a lot of the time. You don't have
Griz wants to get patrons just to get out of the factory food business.
shoes, or your children certainly don't have shoes, even if you manage to have shoes. It's uncomfortable. It's cold in a place like this a lot. So I don't buy that it was nice and clean before. It was really difficult before, and then it was difficult with the Industrial Revolution, but it was a different kind of difficult.
Would you rather have been a peasant or a member of the proletariat?
Exactly.
Who has it better?
Exactly. So that's the question to ask. And Dickens isn't very well placed to ask or answer that question, because he was neither peasant nor proletariat. He, like almost all of the commentators who wrote about the experience of living during the Industrial Revolution that got published and who now form part of our kind of cultural understanding of the period, he was not actually a worker himself. I mean, I know he had in his own case, he had experienced some child labour, but certainly he had experienced some child labour, but he's not exactly, he's not really, by the time he's writing his novels, he's, and even as, I mean, the reasons for him
She can't finish her sentences either.
Experiencing the child labour were slightly unusual compared to those for the kind of the rank and file.
Yeah, it's only because his dad's in debt, right? It's not because he's born
different
into a family that are doing that all the time.
Exactly, slightly different story. So, that's the question to ask: which was better? Well, for me, I think I would strongly suggest that I think being a member of the proletariat is better than being. And we weren't peasants, just to clarify as well. The grandparents of children working and the adults working in the factories in the 19th century hadn't been peasants. They'd been agricultural labourers. So they'd been workers, but they'd worked on somebody's farm instead of working in somebody's factory. Maybe the peasant life is better, but we have to go in England, we have to go hundreds of years back to find lots of peasants. You had the choice of working for a farmer outdoors in the cold, in the rain, digging up fields and laying turnips is not thrilling work, or going and working in the factory. And so those are your options. And when you look at the life stories, the autobiographies of men mostly who have done one or the other, the answer is very, very clear. It's much better to go and work in the factory, and there are lots of reasons for that.
Which is presumably why people go and do it.
The evidence speaks for itself. People go, and they don't tend to go back. They don't go, discover what it's like, and then head straight back as fast as they can. They go, and they stay. They go, they get higher wages, and a lot of people like earning more money. So there's the higher wages, which is a real draw. But it's not just the higher wages. I think that's not the real lure of
It's the creation of the individual.
Urban life. It's just life in the city is more varied, it's more interesting, it's got more opportunities. And having that bit of extra wage is quite empowering for the men who earn it. So you can actually start to make decisions with your life. You can decide to learn to read and write. You can take yourself off to night school. You can get involved in politics. You can be somebody in your community. You can be a leader in the union. Not everybody does this, but you have opportunities that are just not open to you when you are employed on the land.
Emma, you mentioned men there. We've got a question from Flea.
Women had lost their agency in the agrarian productive household and as yet acquired no other kind. And for bourgeois 20th century housewives, labor-saving devices combined with an increasing atomized, individualistic social world to trigger a renewed search for agency, this time within the workplace. I take this detour into women's history to illustrate a core underlying argument. In each case, sex roles has been renegotiated not by some abstract process of moral advancement, but in response to changing material conditions. And in each case, this has been necessary because social and legal norms change more slowly. All this changed dramatically over the last 2 centuries. The Industrial Revolution gave the market immense new powers, provided the state with new means of communication and transportation. This was switching to Yuval Harari's book. And placed at the government's disposal an army of clerks, teachers, policemen, and social workers. At first, the market and the state discovered their path blocked by traditional families and communities, who had little love for outside intervention. Parents and community elders were reluctant to let the younger generation be indoctrinated by nationalist education systems, conscripts into armies, or turned into rootless urban proletariat. Over time, states and markets used their growing power to weaken the traditional bonds of family and community. In order to really break the power of family and community, they needed help from a fifth column. The state and market approached people with an offer that could not be refused. Become individuals, they said. You are no longer dependent on your family or your community. We, the state and the market, will care for you instead. We will provide food, shelter, education, health, welfare, and employment. We will provide pensions, insurance, and protection. A few interesting comments from Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens.
I can't tell how this is going, so I'm just going to...
It's going well, Griz. That's why I'm commenting on it.
Play this next part.
And the not being able to tell how this is going is exactly the experience I have when I'm making videos too. And it's why I make a video and it's like, oh, this is garbage, I'm going to throw it away. Sometimes, very rarely I do, but sometimes I do. I just throw it out there. And if it's garbage, y'all tell me, or at least some of you tell me. And some of you tell me by unsubscribing or not watching my videos anymore, which is fine. And some of you hang in there, and then some of you leave it alone for a while and then come back. It's just a totally normal cycle of how we work. We go through channels. So, no, you're doing good, Griz.
Respond to that and then show you a clip toward the end that's pretty good and call this a video. But
and so now we kind of have this problem disambiguating what is wrong knowledge, what is bad knowledge, and we're losing the capacity to figure that out for ourselves because there's just so much.
And I think part of the difficulty that we're having with dead reckoning is because if you're dead reckoning on the land, well, is it growing or is it not growing? Are you eating or are you not eating? Are your animals thriving or are they struggling? There's so much better feedback. Now in the factory, well, what's your production rate? Is the foreman, is the boss happy with you? But then, it's interesting how you have the tension. On one hand, the rise of the individual. Oh, we want to get to the city. We want to earn wages. Women and children are then suddenly getting into the workplace and all of that too. But then there's other downsides. And so then we start to adjusting to that. But then new evolutions take it further. And we're so awash. What did Jung say earlier? I mean, we're just so awash in this unreal world that we don't get feedback. And then again, so for me, watching videos alone was unhelpful because I couldn't get feedback. And part of the way this channel started was I thought, this is virtually not alone. I thought, well, what if I watch Jordan Peterson videos with people? And I'll let them know what I think. And I'll sort of take the governor off of the Consciousness Congress and let them all sort of rush the mic one at a time. And we'll see what that does. And I'll send that out into the world and we'll see what comes back. And now, again, we're all sort of stuck in funneling all of this stuff through words and through limitations of time and space. But even so, it's better than being isolated and alone, which, of course, is anxiety producing.
Everyone's trying to be an epistemic agent for you. They're trying to tell you what to believe themselves because there's just so much. Everyone's trying to be an epistemic agent for you.
Now, when I asked the question about, is there more information in the city than out in the forest all by yourself? That's what he answered right there for me. Everyone's trying to be your epistemic agent for you. I'm feeling it's sort of like marriage, where on one hand, your agency is very much sort of, it's both limited and encroached upon, but it's also expanded in other ways. And that's kind of been my experience of video making too.
They're trying to tell you what to believe, what to think, and how to think. And I think that...
And that's sometimes sort of welcome because we don't know what to think. But other times we recognize that I'm losing agency by continually outsourcing my thinking. When I did that video with about Keith Manus and looking at it's tremendously ironic that Donald Trump blue pilled so many Christians. And in some ways that's sort of what happened in the Never Trump movement, is that a bunch of people with solid conservative credentials sort of got blue pilled. And what the IDW was, with a bunch of people with solid progressive credentials, got red pilled. And part of why this is happening is we have these voices in our head and these images before our eyes and these beings of light that are being epistemic agents for us, and we're sort of getting lost in the crowd. So that's part of why we're alone and trying to be virtually not alone.
If you're object oriented, the object dictates the terms of how you exist. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
And that's really helpful.
What to believe, what to think, and how to think. And I think that if you're object oriented, the object dictates the terms of how you exist. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
And it's that sense that if you're object oriented, the object can very quickly become the frame. And so then the object dictates the terms.
And so, the phenomenology, things like, philosophies like that, is trying to resituate the subject in relation to the object, whether it's mental or physical. And I think,
and that itself is the breakdown of modernity. It's why modernity is spent, and the subject needs to be resituated.
That's I think where the big.
And this is Peugeot. When Andrea asked Peugeot, how would I talk to a physicist? Well, you're a pattern seeing patterns. The subject is resituated into the environment. You don't zoom up above into the trying to reframe in order to possess a monarchical vision, which is always imaginary and never done perfectly, because we are pattern seeing patterns.
I think that's where it'll eventually cash out, is when the subject is resituated so that they have a free relationship to the objects of the world. I think this is why Stoicism is catching on really big, is because it's saying no matter what that object is, you as subject have control over how you relate and situate yourself to that object.
What happened was, identity used to be from family and blood and the agrarian society, and if you weren't family and blood with your society, then it got wiped
Identity was received, not achieved.
out. If you weren't family and blood with your society, then it got wiped out. So we invented the state to do the wet works and settle the disputes. But the state
that's brilliant. We invented the state to do the wet works. It's really good.
It can only make. So we invented the state to do the wet works and settle the disputes. But the state can only make three things: like soldiers, bureaucrats, and the ladies that service them.
That's good.
So, soldiers, bureaucrats, and the ladies that service them. So, when it pulled all the people out of the farms and into the cities, that's really all it could make. And the knowledge never drifted back properly. It wasn't properly returned to the families and the farms and the peoples and the cultures.
But we have to remember that the farms and the peoples and the cultures weren't originally either.
So now you just have this blob of identityless components that are interchangeable, trying to be the best and most flexible components they can be. And
trying to be the most useful components they can be to the machine.
Tyler Durden's thing was he replaced the meta myth of a God that so loved the world he gave his only son to help redeem it, just to blanket redeem it.
He's imbibing Calvinism.
To this one here.
You're not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. Not the car you drive. Not the contents of your wallet.
You're not your gender. You're your secret, sacred self. What we have here is a breakdown in the layer cake of compartmentalized knowledge.
This is my favorite part of the video. This is genius.
Because you see, for you to function as an idiot farmer in our society, you can't know that it's better to be an office worker, or it's more comfortable to be an office worker over
And I love that he's doing this in Microsoft Paint.
here. And if you want to be comfortable being an office worker, you can't know that you're way more comfortable if you're a hedge fund manager over here. And now that we have global media telling us what's important, how to think globally and act locally, like what the people need to know to function down here to raise more children to function this way, is lost in this epic distraction, because everything is all this useless information is being spread out and controlled and manipulated and sold and packaged and excitingly given you in this web of information. And the problem is people aren't getting the information.
The information is lost. Human beings, we're remarkable with information, but we lose it so quickly, and the information is lost. And in fact, in some cases, the machine is destroying the information because, sort of in the bit that I read from Harari, it's in the interest of the state to decompose the family, to turn us into the widgets. C.S. Lewis wrote that in his essay on equality. And this isn't incidental or accidental.
People aren't getting the information.
And the information isn't just, when you think about information, things in a list. It's things that have to be mapped onto us. It won't necessarily be mediated by words, because words don't have enough bandwidth to actually take all of the mapping, that modeling from parents and multi-generational parents actually put in the children. It's all of this knowledge. This is why I've got to take a look at Esther Meek's stuff.
People are being told what's important is global things when their area of effect, their what do you call it, zone of proximal influence, is local. Like,
and so when you look at the Jonathan Haidt thing that I noted, that people keep looking up at the values when the knowledge they really need is all the local knowledge, because that's the appropriate place for the knowledge to be set. Remember, the actor from the context is absurdity.
Like at their city council meetings, but they care about who's president. Is local, like at their city council meetings, but they care about who's president, and they don't even know who's on the city council. And so what we have is
paintballs for Jesus. The fourth wall.
Push further and further and further out. And so it talks about the distance between us and, say, someone like Napoleon, who has just kept,
C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce,
building his new worlds further and further and further out. And then you have this strange bus where these beings...
Because in C.S. Lewis's hell, no local knowledge is necessary or possible, just as relationships are not either.
From this world, they want to go someplace else, and they've all got their own schemes. I want to bring something real back to this world to jumpstart the economy, because the problem of this world is everyone can have everything they want, but the one thing you can't have is a relationship with another person, because that's completely at odds with the absolute limitlessness of the possibilities. Now, of course, Lewis didn't have the cyberspace and the awareness of cyberspace,
the cyberspace metaphors,
as we have it, but
so I can improve myself. One of the things that I wanted to mention is, I know this is annoyingly meta, but recursion is a vital aspect of, I don't know what Vervaeke would say. Basically, it's a vital aspect of cognition. We go back and we go back and we go back and we go back. And obviously, if you get OCD, you go back too many times for it to be productive, and you lose your relevance realization. But the recursiveness of, even listening to myself and thinking, okay, this is helpful, this is not helpful, that focuses and narrows and refines and sharpens.
His imagination was already informed by the affluence of the Industrial Revolution. My unlimited affirmation cannot coexist with yours.
Yeah. This was... So I think this was what Heidegger was warning us about when he talked about technology. To just give a short overview of it, he's saying, the Rhine River is no longer good. It becomes good for something. becomes good for hydroelectrical power. And so what happens is, in the technological view, we begin to treat people as technology. So they become good for something and not good in themselves. And what he says is, in the technological view, things cannot be revealed. And that becomes the predominant view. So we kind of see people as objects. But that is to say, from our perspective, we strip that person of agency and we impose our whatever agency we want onto or into them, and we reap the benefits of that. And so now all of our relationships are becoming almost transactional, right? Like you were talking about dating, dating.
And that's the end of the video. So I hope this was helpful. It was helpful for me. And in that way, my channel is sort of selfish. So let me know what you think.